How do you suggest a lady cope with a marriage that is unequally yoked through no fault of her own?
Okay. The important part in this question is the birds keep coming, the bird feeder that we're using, is through no fault of her own. So I'm going to back up just a second and then I will answer your question. There are way too many women in this world that are starting relationships with men and causing an unequally yoked relationship. The Bible talks about Christians should be seeking after Christ, and if your spouse, the person you're looking to be your spouse, is not equally seeking after Christ, you guys are unequally yoked. So I've dealt with this with over the years with people I've known, that you can't be seeking Christ and seeking somebody who wants nothing to do with Christ. So if your relationship is not based on two people trying to grow closer to Christ and your relationship with each other is not building that up, that's a relationship that you should end before you're married. So putting that out there first. But the question that was asked was if the spouse is unequally yoked because of no fault of their own, whether somebody thought that they married a Christian who is now not living as a Christian, or the one spouse, the woman we're talking about in the situation, has been saved since the marriage happened. So is that what I'm getting from this question? Okay. So what I would suggest is the Bible says that we are to love, we are to respect our husbands. So your husband is still the head of your household, whether he's a Christian or not. And we are supposed to follow. I'm actually going to have Virginia step out and go get me a Bible for this, because I want to look up a certain passage just because I want to make sure that I'm totally quoting it right. I should have brought that out with me before, but I forgot that there were. I was thinking more practical questions, so she's going to come out. But a woman is supposed to respect her husband even if he's not following Christ. So we had a situation where really good friends of ours, the wife believed that the husband was doing something that was sinful, and she decided that she was going to be disrespectful to him in many other, like every other aspect of life that did not involve this decision. So if Mark asked me to go murder the neighbor, I would have to say no. He's a Christian, so I'm not dealing with the unequally yoked in my marriage. But if he asked me to go do that, I would have to say no. But if he asked me that, and then if he asked if we could have meatloaf for supper, I wouldn't have to say, no, you can't have meatloaf because I don't like your other decision. You can still be respectful to him in things that do not pertain to whatever you think the sin is. And if there is something in his life that you believe is sin, especially if at this point your husband is a Christian, you should pray and ask God how you can help your husband in that sin. If it's about killing the neighbor, how can you help restore that relationship with the neighbor instead of your husband wanting to kill him? That's always a good thing. Can you find for me while I talk about the wives loving their husbands, loving their wives, Ephesians? So she's just gonna look that up. So learn how to respect your husband who is not a Christian in ways that you can honor him. So what he chooses for dinner, what you guys do for activities, as long as they're not sinful, helping your husband, showing your husband love and respect in those ways. I just knew it was going to take me a little while to get through there. So wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. So submitting, choosing to put yourself under the headship is submission. It's different than obedience. A child has to obey their parents. Submission is as a wife, I've chosen to put myself in this position, to their own husbands as to the Lord. Those things that the Lord would ask you to do. The husband is head of the wife, so we need to see our place that God has put us. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands, as the church submits to Christ. The church submitting to Christ is putting ourselves under his authority. Christ is never going to ask us to do something that isn't good and perfect. Our husbands may. So submitting to them when they're asking us to do things that are not sinful. Not something you don't agree with, like, I don't really like fishing. You don't have to argue with your husband on that one. Go fishing with him. Enjoy. Make it a good time. It goes on to say, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So it ends this chapter 5 with, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. There's definitely a easier time for a Christian wife to respect and be able to submit to her husband, in that there aren't going to be or shouldn't be these issues of sinful behavior being asked of them. But a wife needs to love her husband and respect him in the ways that she can that are not sinful. Also, asking your husband in an honorable way what you can and cannot do with your children. God has told us that we are to train our children and raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and that is normally the husband's, the father's job, with the mother assisting in that. But if your husband is not doing that, still doing that in a way that is respectful to him, most husbands would agree that the things in the Bible, do not lie, do not murder, do not steal, are all good things to teach your children. Even if they're not Christians, they still believe those things are good. So trying to find a way that you can teach your children those things that are not in a disrespectful way to him. So if your husband, we knew of a family where the husband and wife were separated for a while, and the husband did not want his wife going to church on a regular basis. She would go he would let her go sometimes if he was doing other things, but on a regular basis, he wanted her home with him. The Bible tells us not to forsake the assembly of ourselves together, but she found other times that she could meet with Christian women and she could be built up and she could read her Bible and do those things, but not be out of the house on a Sunday morning when he wanted to spend time with her. Are there ways like that that you can teach your kids and get your kids involved in things that are not disrespectful to your husband, like maybe going to a Wednesday night church service or a Sunday night church service instead of Sunday morning? It would be different with each family depending on what the husband is asking, but there are a lot of times that if you are teaching, I think another big thing is teaching your children to love and respect their father when you're teaching them what the Bible says. I have seen families where dad is not a Christian and mom will have a bad attitude towards dad and teach the children to have a bad attitude towards dad about church, when we're allowed to go, those types of things, which puts a bad example in front of the kids on how they're supposed to treat their father. So I think teaching the kids first and foremost want to know who God is and those types of things, but in regarding their father, to love and respect him and to show Christ-like love towards their father, who may not be a Christian. So I hope that answers the question for the person who asked it.